Right?
Happy New Year, Mary Claire.
Yeah, we're back.
Yeah, it's good to be back.
There we go. All right. We are, after a brief hiatus to celebrate the holidays with our families, we are back to continue the series on Dr. Brian, your new book, The Culture Code. So we have worked through kind of the introduction, the purpose of the book, the introduction, chapters 1 through 4. We actually did kind of a double click on chapter 4, and that it was a much longer episode. And then the next episode, we really talked about the previous one. How do you actually do strategy? So
Right.
once you're strategically aligned, how do you define the strategy by which to execute against that? So we're going to keep rolling in the book. Chapter 5 is personal performance, when everyone brings their A game. And in the acronym of SPORT, SPORT, we've done S. We're now going to dive deeper into P before we move on to the others. But as I was just telling Brian, for our viewers or listeners, we spend a lot of time working with clients on S, strategically aligned, getting companies, organizations, and teams strategically aligned, and a lot of time in R, results accountability. So setting up that system by which to execute on a week-to-week basis against the strategy that we've set, and measure that in the process and create a culture of multidimensional accountability. We'll get to that in a later episode. We spend a lot of time with people on that. We spend a lot of time with people on O, which we'll get to next time, operational execution. P, we spend less time on personal performance. And there's a reason for that. And we're going to get at that today, Brian. But when we talk about personal performance, I think you bring a unique perspective to this concept of personnel and then personal performance, which we want to dive into. All right, Brian, so let's dive into P. Tell us some of these unique elements of personal performance that we need to understand and help our listeners and readers understand better.
You know, P has been a very interesting area, a very interesting principle as I've taken time over the years to think about this, and it's kind of revealed itself over time. The initial impetus for P really came from a recognition that as you create your strategy, if you don't have the right people with the right skills to do that strategy, that you're not going to be successful. And so, but a lot of times it's something that people don't think about, and they're like, "Well, I have this great strategy," and then, "Oh, it didn't work," and we rarely really examine was one of the reasons we didn't get it done because we didn't have the people who knew how to get it done.
Yeah.
So that was the thing that got it started. But then it unfolded and became a much richer area for us for a couple of reasons. One is we started to look at skills, and that took us into areas that you would expect it to, like hiring, training, development, and we can talk about all those things in a little bit as we go forward. But it also opened up some areas that we hadn't thought much about, like what does it look like to constantly be improving as a member of a team? Right. And we think about organizational continuous improvement. And that was, by the way, a groundbreaking area that the Japanese gave to us over a period of time, where they said, look, organizations are living, breathing things that get better or worse over time. And how do you get into a mode of ongoing continuous improvement? But as we got thinking about that, we realized that, well, an organization is just the sum of its parts. Hopefully it adds up to more than the sum of its parts, but nonetheless, we can't get better as an organization if we're not getting better individually. So what does that look like? And then it's really interesting because in most organizations, it's very hard to admit you need to continually improve. If I walk into a group of people and of my team and say, wow, I need to get better at my job, that's very hard to say. It's a very exposing thing to say, and people are fearful for their jobs, and maybe rightfully so. Now, interestingly, there are some organizations that are really good at this, that have internalized getting better over time, that recognize that you're not at the top of your game and constantly need this improvement. So you think about sports is a big one, obviously, but also the arts, law, medicine. I mean, these are things where they actually even use the word practice. I'm practicing as a doctor. I'm practicing as an attorney, right? I practice as an athlete. I practice as a vocalist or as an artist. I work on my craft and I get better, recognizing I'm not at the top of my game.
I think before we continue this, I always love when you say the word craft in the context of business, because it is never used, and we're all developing a craft as a
Correct.
leader, as a manager, as a salesperson, as a CS person, as an engineer, as a blah, 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 blah. But that concept of craft to me removes this idea of I'm not good enough.
Yeah.
Or I don't want to admit I'm not good enough.
That's right. Yeah.
And I just, it's a shifter. It's a paradigm shifter for me. So I just wanted to highlight that for any listeners.
I love that you brought that out, because if you think about this, take an athlete. It's so funny because, I love football, and people say, well, did you play football? I played high school football. But the jump between high school and D1 college football is really large. It's huge.
And
there are a lot of factors there, right? I mean, there's body type, there's speed, there's strength. But the level of difference around the craft is very fundamentally just discontinuous, right? I mean, if I'm going to play at high school versus play D1, my craft is not the same. The same is true if I'm going to go from D1 college football to being a professional athlete. It's just not the same. Take a vocalist, and you listen, and we love to listen to great singers. Some of us like to think that we're good singers, hence the whole karaoke industry, right? Everyone thinks they can stand up and sing. But as soon as you hear someone, but as soon as you hear someone stand up and sing, including ourselves, and we listen to ourselves, we're like, ooh, wow, there's a big difference between what I just laid down on tape and what a professional singer would lay down on tape, right? Just the craft is really different. And to your point, we often start in our business and our work and in our environment, and we don't think about what we're doing as a craft. We just think about it as as a contribution or as a job of the thing that we do. But do we really look and say, where am I deficient? How would I get better? Where would I get better? What would my craft look like if I were better? Then, because that leads us right to the next question. How do I practice?
Yeah.
Where in my org can I practice?
Well, and I think I want to not draw another distinction too between continuing education, which is great. We got to fill our brains, and it informs our practice. That can be celebrated, but practice is never celebrated.
Correct.
And I think this gets back to process with the whole thing. This whole acronym, every part of it is a process, and the whole the sport in and of itself is a process. But treating personal performance as a process too is another one of those paradigm shifters.
Totally agree. Yeah. So if you think about this as a leader, and you're going to implement a way for your people to practice, and you're going to be obvious about it, right? I mean, you're going to really make that happen. It's going to be part of the day or part of the week. What does that look like? And where does it happen? And how do people take advantage of it? And are they forced to take advantage of it or not? Is the expectation of the culture that they take advantage of it? Like, for example, if I became part of a professional football team and I said, I'm not going to practice, I wouldn't last long, right? I'm not going to be there very long. But yet in another organization, it's really easy to come in and not practice and in many ways hide, which leads to a whole nother discussion about, the difference between high performers, mediocre performers, and low performers. And does your organization shield your mediocre and low performers? Because there's a tremendous cost to that. Or are you obvious about the training opportunities that your people can have and how they do it?
I think this gets back to culture. Well, we're talking about that, but from a culture specific actions related from a culture perspective, again, we can have continuing education. We can have trainings. Often people do training and they're like, now what? Or the high off of the training lasts for a couple of weeks or a couple of months. And I think in the highest performing teams I've been on, practice was part of our weekly rhythm. We practiced. We picked a call from a sales team. We picked, and this was a kudos to Rachel Melee, who was our sales leader at the time. But we picked, and Brian, you know her well.
Yeah.
She had our team pick a specific call that week at a type. It was a closing call. It was an intro call. It was an opportunity identification call, whatever it is. And we picked 1 or 2 a week, and we practiced it with a teammate or with each other. And we brought the CS team in on it. And it was so dynamic. And that was on the path to one of our best years ever, but it got us in that habit. But it also, from a culture perspective, we felt like the masks came off I'm not sure what it was, but there was a level of vulnerability there and the opportunity to not do well and learn and be ready for the live. So it's just for culturally, it was so healthy.
Yeah, you just drew a distinction that is it's really worth drawing out, which is training versus practicing. A lot of times when we think about, bettering ourselves or developing ourselves, we think about training. And there's a difference between what you know and what you do.
Yeah.
So as we learn, as the training, we know new things, but that doesn't mean that we're applying the things that we learned. A lot of people might read this book or even listen to this podcast. Doesn't mean they're going to be a better leader.
Yeah.
Unless they practice the principles that are attached to these things, nothing will change. So yeah, I might know a lot about what I should do. Doesn't mean I am or even doing it well. So I might have a lot of training. That's one thing, but where do I get to practice what I've learned? And how do I know how well I'm doing at the thing that I've learned? Where's the feedback mechanism that comes in that practice?
So Brian, in the sport model, how do we encourage this as a process and as a behavior and as a part of the culture?
I think there's two ways. I think one way, you go back to the O, where you're talking about standard operating procedures, right, and processes. I think you have to be very intentional about setting up practice processes. Like if I'm a sales team, one of the very best practices that we can do is role playing, just like you were just talking about, right? And if I'm in other areas, feedback, leadership feedback, 360 reviews, those kinds of things, very important for us to understand how things are working or not working with what we're doing, where we're weak and where we're strong. We can certainly do training, but then, and then taking an opportunity to actually get the feedback and work on those things.
Yeah.
Like, how would have I had a conversation with this employee about, improving their performance? Would have I done that better? I need to do that and bounce that off of somebody and talk with somebody and have those interactions. And that needs to be intentional. So I need to set that up, which, by the way, leads us right into our KPAs and our accountability. So I need to be accountable to my own progress and development. If we were, for example, C-suite leaders together, I might make a KPA that says, and you'd have to agree, obviously, but we're going to spend 30 minutes, Mary Claire and I, and we're going to talk through several difficult interactions that we either have had or need to have with other leaders and how we're going to do that. And we're going to role play that before it happens. By the way, almost all practicing is role playing. Think about a professional football team. What they're doing in practice is role playing.
That's true. That's a good point.
Right? They're just role playing on each other. So this is where we really try to walk through what we think is going to happen. We practice how it's going to unfold. And then we try to think about contingencies. What happens if so-and-so does this, or if such and such team does this? How do we respond? So almost all practice is just role playing.
I think of as for young leaders who haven't had as many critical conversations. I remember putting KPAs just on our leadership team. When I needed to have a critical conversation, I would script it out. My personal process is I script it out to understand from the other person's perspective, and then I often used our CFO and sometimes our head of services as that bouncer offer, if you will, to practice that conversation. It was so helpful from a leadership perspective to go into a conversation calm and prepared at the end of the day, just like going into a sales conversation prepared.
Right. So. One thing that really strikes me as an opportunity is for you to have scripted out what you wanted to say and have someone else read it to you as if you were receiving it.
Ooh,
and then just say to yourself, to yourself, like, how does this land with me? Where would I want it to be a little softer? Where would I want it to be a little harder if I were hearing it?
Yeah.
Right. To be effective for me, if this were landing for me. So that's a thought too.
That's a good thought. I always had them read it and then we discuss it and hypothesize. Yeah, that's a good one, Brian. You gotta write that one down.
But these opportunities, right? This is where you have to be intentional about creating a process to practice.
Yeah.
And that's how you're going to get better on this.
Well, before we wind down, I would hate to leave the conversation without talking a little bit about that hiring versus training. Yeah. Just that sometimes it's appropriate to hire, sometimes it's appropriate to train up. Let's talk a little bit more about that, because it is imperative to look at your strategy and understand, do I have the right people in the right seats? And am I going to provide them with the culture to practice and the opportunity to train? So in all of your work, how have you worked with organizations to move that conversation forward?
So hiring and firing is a very nuanced process, right? I mean, there's a lot of statistics out there about hiring that even done, there's some quotes too from some of the CEOs. We have a few in the book that, even done really, really well, it's probably a 50-50 proposition. And it's just because you don't have a long history with a human being as you make this decision. You're trying to understand somebody in 3 or 4 meetings, and it's just very, very hard. And so I've kind of come to the conclusion that I'm probably not going to get that right as often as I would like. And so I also have to be willing on the other side of that to either rapidly intervene to train and upskill, or to let somebody go if they're not a good fit, in order to find the right fit as you're going forward. Now, I think that the difference for me between all of this and the people that you hire, 90% of it really comes down to the will part of this. If you've got someone who's really willing to do what it takes to move forward quickly, you can do a lot with that. Even if they don't have the specific skill set, you can acquire that skill set. And increasingly in our day and age, easier and easier, right? I mean, AI makes it so easy to get knowledge and so easy to pick up skills. If the person is willing and vulnerable and able to, practice and work and move quickly to do that, there's a lot you can do with that. But again, it's very nuanced. I would say this: there is a very high cost. Here's the big insight. Most leaders are happy to stick with mediocrity because the hiring and training and upskilling process is so hard.
Yeah.
So they're like, hey, if I can just get mediocrity, I'm good with that. But I would argue that mediocrity has a very high cost. If you can get to better or best as opposed to only good, then it's worth doing, and it's worth putting those things into place. There's a great story in the book about Netflix. Yeah. And they ask a simple question. They're like, would you, if this person left on their own, would you be sad that they left? And if the answer is no, then you shouldn't keep them.
Yeah.
So, because really what you're telling yourself is, this person is, I feel so ambivalent about this person that if they left, I would be okay with it. Then you should probably help them leave, or help them change that condition of their craft, of the execution of their craft, so that you don't feel that way.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's helpful, Brian. Again, it is super nuanced, and there's conversation of book and conversation of book and conversation of book on this very topic.
Totally.
And, I think everybody, good leaders are trying to do their best, and good teammates are trying to do their best. So, okay. Well, we're going to continue the conversation on, I think, one of our favorite topics other than S&R, which is, next week.
That's right.
So operational execution. So looking forward to that, Brian. Thanks for joining us again. And thank you to all you listeners. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like or follow us on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, we hope your drive toward peak performance is successful. We'll see you later.